I'm coming at you in the wee hours just outside of Detroit. We're edging up on 2 a.m. out here on Samhain Eve, and we're heading into that time of year with Dias de los Muertos coming on tomorrow, where we really take time to remember those who have gone before us and pay our respects and also take advantage of the opportunity to feel closer to them and have more of a direct link since the veil is at its thinnest. And I thought it was the perfect time to bring something that has been a long time in the making. And that is a very special late night talking tarot, the Red Diary, where I am going to be channeling Marilyn Monroe. And this is not something that is going to be able to be completed in one night. So it's going to come to you in episodes. I am pre-recording this. I do not want to be interrupted by trolls when I am channeling. I want to be able to hold a respectful space. Sometimes trolls come in on the live chats and they're not really anything but a nuisance, but I don't feel like tolerating it when I'm doing something like this. So I will be available to drop in with you all on the live chat in the comments. I'll be there with you, okay? And we'll drop in on this together. But I really just want to hold this respectful space for Marilyn. I feel like it's really important. And there's a reason why I felt drawn to bring in Marilyn specifically. I do want to say that yes, I am a medium and I've had these abilities since I was a little girl. It's not something I really talked about because I was raised in a very strict Christian upbringing. And I always had felt at odds with this part of myself. I felt like me having these abilities must have meant that there was something wrong with me or that I was somehow evil. And it actually caused me a great deal of fear and a lot I had to overcome to get to the place where I could open up to this being just simply the truth of who I am and embracing that and recognizing the gifts that come forward from that. That being said, as a medium, it's not one of those things where I can just like bring up the dead. It doesn't work like that. They're meant to be at rest, at ease, free of the bondage of this life. They're on to bigger, better things and a more wide open playing field where they don't have to deal with the limitations of this corporeal form and this earthly reality. So, I don't like to disturb them, but when they do want to communicate, they will come on through to me and they'll say, hey, I want to come forward. I have something I want to share. And I get people coming in from all walks of life. And in the work that I've done, where I've done body work and Ayurveda, and I've worked with people through Panchakarma and these kind of things, there have been experiences where sometimes, or maybe if I'm doing a reading for somebody, spontaneously someone comes in for them and has a message to deliver. It took a lot of courage to really trust that inspiration, to trust what I was hearing, to bring it forward, because there's always this fear, this apprehension about how it's going to be received or if the person will be able to really take it in. But I found that as I've trusted that, it's just led to nothing but beautiful healing experiences. And so I've learned to let go of my need to not look foolish is what it really comes down to. And I'm happy that I sometimes also get people I would never expect to hear from come through. And one of those people was Marilyn Monroe. And I always felt drawn to Marilyn Monroe, much as everybody felt drawn to Marilyn Monroe. She was the biggest movie star of her time in the 50s, and she's continued to be iconic. People love her today. People know her today. She has spanned generations and she is everlasting. And she is the embodiment of what we see as beautiful, but her beauty goes beyond the surface. Her beauty is also deep within her, in this place inside of her that was so vulnerable and tender and loving and kind and just a beautiful soul, really beautiful soul. And she had a very tragic ending, and I am going to dive into that a bit. We will be going into that, but I don't want to focus intensely on specifics of that ending. We'll go into surrounding circumstances and hmm, the lesser known aspects concerning her passing and the circumstances surrounding that. But I'm not going to go into descriptive details of what happened to her because I feel that's disrespectful and she doesn't need that spotlight put on her to be put on her in that way. I want to make sure that I'm holding a really respectful space. And that's what feels right because there is a lot of heaviness around it, actually. There's a lot of heaviness. And I first really felt the connection to the heaviness around her passing when I had a very intense drop in with her in a dream that I had. And I had this dream, it was probably about three to 3.5 years ago. And I was lucid dreaming. I've always been a lucid dreamer because I've always gotten a lot of information coming through in my dreams. And as a child, it was a way that I could learn to find a sense of safety within that dream realm that often could be frightening for me, especially with my religious upbringing and what was coming in for me. So I've really learned how to be quite proficient at moving through dream time and to be conscious within dream time and to be able to freeze my dreams if I'm not digging the way something's going down and to be able to change the flow of how the story is emerging. So sometimes I get visitations in my dreams. This happens. I've had it happen quite a few times actually, and a lot of my messages do come through dream time. And in particular, things relating to more global energies coming in, world events, things of this nature. I get a lot of that information through my dream time. So I had this dream one night that I was in the room where Marilyn had passed. And I saw Marilyn laying on the bed and she was face down. She had no clothes on. And something about just the image and what I saw to me it felt so disrespectful and it felt so violating. And it's making me feel emotional thinking back to it. And I remember having this really intense sensation that nobody deserved to leave this life in that way, and especially with such disrespect. And in the dream, I went and I turned her over and I looked around the room and I found this really fluffy, soft pink robe. And I dressed her in it and got her all, cozy in the robe. And I sat on the bed with her and I laid her head on my lap and I brushed her hair. And as I brushed her hair, I talked to her and I told her how sorry I was that she'd had such a hard life and that I was sorry that it had to end this way for her, but that I was there with her and I just wanted to give her some kind of connection, some kind of sense of comfort, some sense of feeling respected and held in that moment in time. Because what is time, right? Time is time is just a construct. It's all now. The time is always all now at all times, any point in history. It's all energetically connected. So I was brushing her hair and just offering her some soothing words. And then I started to sing to her. And I just sang to her and brushed her hair for her and gave her a moment of human connection and respect and holding and honoring space around her. And then I felt like it was time to go, and I gently moved her head off of my lap, and I got up and I put my hand on her heart and I said, I hope you find peace. And after that, she went, and she just, I got so much sentience right now. She let out this exhale that was just like, if you could feel the weight of the exhale, I wish I could transfer it. And I woke up and I was so affected by this dream, and it has stayed with me even to this day. It stayed with me because I could feel that sense of when you're holding something in so long. You're holding something in so long. You've been holding pain so long. You've been holding heaviness so long. And all you're waiting for, is that moment when you get to exhale, like Toni Morrison talked about in her book, waiting to exhale. And we've all been there, right? We've all been there at different points in our lives where we were waiting for that moment to exhale. We were so damn tired of holding it in. And it's something that's just always stayed with me. So when I did the first Late Nite Talk'n'Tarot with Jim Morrison, who came in really strongly, he's still hanging out. He's still here. He's very happy that Marilyn was coming tonight. Yeah, I instantly knew that I would have to bring Marilyn in. And then it's been just such a wild experience of synchronicity after synchronicity. Marilyn every She has been coming up for me everywhere. Like, I'm talking in the most unusual places. The other day I was at the grocery store, and I just felt compelled to look to the side while I was waiting in checkout, and there was Marilyn Merlot. There was Marilyn Merlot wine, and there's Marilyn looking at me on this bottle of wine, winking. And I was like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe this. So I knew that I had to drop in with this. So I'm really excited to do this. And I made up a big deck, okay, of all quotes from Marilyn Monroe. And we are going to do a reading with these. I'm also going to be pulling in tarot. We're going to let Marilyn have the floor. We're going to let Marilyn's voice be heard. But I also want to give just a little background and a little history about her life for those who don't know a whole lot about her. The younger generation is just discovering her, and I think it's beautiful, and I just love that legacy living on for her from generation to generation. She's every bit as much of an icon today as she was way, way, way back then. And she's got just such a, that's that star on the rise story, that you hear about. It's like the quintessential Hollywood fairy tale, but with it comes so much, so much. Her life was so colorful, and she lived it on her terms in her own way. And make no mistake about it, though she played the dumb blonde, she was sharp as a tack. She was sharp as a tack. And she was a true broad. She was a very strong woman. And she had actually been through quite a bit in her life. She came from a very difficult childhood. Her mother suffered from mental illness and was institutionalized. She didn't know who her father was. Her grandmother also was institutionalized. So there was this vulnerability mentally that ran within her family. She also, at her, at her, certain juncture in her own life, she also was institutionalized briefly, but Joe DiMaggio, her second husband, came to her rescue and he sprung her from that joint and took care of her. They had a very interesting bond and a very interesting relationship. They had a great affinity and friendship with each other, but they also had a lot of volatility in their connection. But at the end of the day, I have to say, Joe DiMaggio, he came through for Marilyn. He showed up. He did. He showed up, and he did have a deep love for her. He had a deep love for her. He even organized her funeral, so he was somebody who really stayed true to her, was loyal to her. And I'm getting from her right now coming through that she just wants that known that despite the turbulence in their marriage, that she had so much respect for him and so much love for him, and that he really had her back at a time when nobody else did. So they had a very special bond, very special connection. Marilyn spent much of her life in orphanages. She was at one point, taken in by a family, and um, that was wonderful for a while. But there came a point when, she was in danger of going back to the orphanage again, and so there was a discussion had with the neighbor who had a son named James Doherty. And they decided that at the age of 16, he and Marilyn should get married to spare her from going back into the orphanage, going back into the system. And it was a time of uncertainty, time of uncertainty and brewing war. And there was, concern about just creating the most stable environment for her possible. And so she married James Doherty, but from there, she was an independent broad. Marilyn actually has Lilith really strongly aspected in her chart, like in the first house, riding right on her ascendant. So that gives you some insight into her character. She also has big Leo energy. She was a Gemini with Leo rising, and all really in that first house. So first house often, when you got that action going on there, that is often a placement that can lead to somebody that's really going to be in the public eye. But um, she had a very, certain sense of independence and moxie and mouth just naturally born into her through her stars. She also had a water trine, okay, Cancer, Pisces, Scorpio, in her chart. And so she was also quite intuitive, quite sensitive. She could really read people. She's telling me right now, what I'm getting from her is that she said she could always tell what people were thinking about her. She always knew what their true thoughts were about her. Many people would kind of smile at her face, they would placate her, but she could feel their judgments coming through. She did a lot of forgiving people without them knowing it. She was very sharp and she was very perceptive. She could have very easily called people out on their behavior, but she had too much class for that. And she also had too much dignity because in her mind, she knew that it wasn't even worth the trouble for her to be so bothered to call it out. And isn't that a smart way to move through life, right? Don't get entangled in the energy. I think that was because she already had such a heightened sensitivity that she had to be very mindful of that, not taking on other people's energy. And there was a bit of that was also just survival, the need to survive with the upbringing that she had, the instability that she had. There was a lot of trouble with trusting people and just allowing herself to be vulnerable, allowing herself to be vulnerable. And eventually, her husband, James, he did go off to war and she got work in a factory, and that's actually where she first got discovered. And I believe his name was Tom Kelly. Tom Kelly first discovered her and wanted to take some pictures of her. He was working on a project. He spotted her and thought she would be perfect for it. So he shot some photos of her, and then this kind of like lit a spark in her. It lit a spark in her. This was her moment of being discovered because it eventually led to the infamous shot, the infamous nude series of shots that was later featured in Playboy, but initially was part of John Baumgart's calendar. And John Baumgart saw Tom Kelly's images of Marilyn and was really intrigued, thought she had the perfect look for this nude series he wanted to do. And he wanted it to be very tasteful. And so Tom talked to Marilyn to see if she would be interested in taking this on. And at first she was like, no way, I don't do that. I don't do nudes. But then, she realized that she was a little tight. She was a little tight on her money, and she was having some trouble scraping up some rent. So she actually decided to reverse that decision, and she contacted John and said she would do it, but only if his wife was present while they did the photo shoot. So she was very concerned about her safety in this situation. She did have a trauma history, so this makes sense that she would want to feel secure in an environment like that, and especially with something that vulnerable. And at that time, that was not a common practice at that time, right? I mean, very different mindset back in the 50s than it is now. Now we live in the age where people get famous with a sex tape, okay? But it wasn't like that back then. It wasn't like that. So she was very much concerned about her privacy. She didn't want people to know that it was her. She was assured that it would not be an issue. And at the time, John Baumgart had these calendars. He had them set up where there was like a transparent layover film that would go over them that was like negligees, okay? So that it wasn't like outright, nudity when you first looked at it, but you could lift that and then you could see the picture as it was. And he would send these through the mail, but there was problems with disseminating these through the mail. It ended up becoming an issue down the road. And it was at that time that Hugh Hefner approached John and asked for the rights because he wanted to feature the photos in Playboy. And he was able to buy the rights to those photos for $500. Tom Kelly also $500. Okay, he got $500 for taking those photos of Marilyn for John Baumgart's calendar, and Marilyn got $50. It's interesting because she is the most famous pinup of all time. And she even changed her signature on the calendar because she didn't want people to equate it with her. She was a rising starlet at the time. She was just getting started. What was the name? I wrote it down. I can't remember what name she signed, but she signed a different name. Let's see. Do I have it here? Mona Monroe. She signed her name Mona Monroe because she was hoping to kind of like protect her identity. She didn't want anybody to know that it was her. And she was assured she would have her privacy. I mean, they said everything they needed to say to get what they wanted out of her. And this was kind of a pattern that followed Marilyn throughout her career, where people would tell her what she wanted to hear to manipulate her into getting her to do what they wanted her to do. And at the same time, she knew that the game was being played and she made her choices. Like she's telling me right now, like I knew exactly what I was getting into. She was not a fool about that. Um, she did want to live that lifestyle. She wanted to have her time to shine. She loved performing, and particularly she loved singing. She loved singing. She wished she could have done more singing. She in particularly loved jazz. She loved jazz so much. She loved jazz. She loved Billie Holiday. Loved Billie Holiday. And so she loved the ability to be able to share her voice in that way. But she didn't always enjoy the types of roles that she was cast in because she felt like she really got pigeonholed. She felt like she got cast in this dumb blonde, sort of stereotype. And she would play it. She would play it to the nines, but she would also overplay it. And the reason why she would overplay it is because it was sort of like her taking a little jab at the people who were casting her in those roles, although they didn't pick up on it because they're not as smart as her. Ted just said, ooh, it's true though. And I've really been enjoying tapping into her energy the past few days. She is spicy, she's saucy, she's mouthy, she's fun. She's fun. I really like Marilyn's energy, but that's the reason why she was always like, and just overdoing it on, looking like like, oh, gee, this it was sarcastic. It was extremely sarcastic. She had so much more potential than that, so much more potential than that. And yet she enjoyed the lifestyle and she did enjoy glamming it up. She loved the glamour. She loved the glitz. She thought everybody deserved their time to shine and sparkle. So this is something that very much appealed to her. And she sometimes put herself in compromising positions in order to be able to play those roles, in order to be able to play those roles. But she was actually very intelligent. She was a highly intelligent woman. And this really got revealed down the road. This got revealed down the road um, with the type of people she started to associate with the type of people she started to hang out with. And namely, we're looking at some of the big wigs like the Rat Pack, Frank Sinatra, the Goodfellas. And then later, of course, we have most infamously the Kennedys. And that's where it starts to get really, really juicy. Now, I do want to dive in a little bit about that time period and leading up to right before her passing. There's the most infamous moment, that kind of really publicly outed the connection between Robert Kennedy and JFK and Marilyn, and that was at JFK's birthday when Marilyn wore that famous dress and came out to sing happy birthday to the president. Now, it's really interesting to note that something very unusual happened that night, and it's a significant moment. And I encourage you to see some footage. I encourage you to go and check out some footage of this. You can look it up on YouTube. of that moment when she went to sing Happy Birthday to John F. Kennedy. There was a very unusual exchange that occurred that night. Marilyn was kind of known to run late. She often did run late to things, but there was a very interesting interaction. Peter Lawford was introducing Marilyn to come out and sing Happy Birthday to the president. And it was rumored at this time that she was his mistress. And so this was a very awkward situation, okay? Very awkward situation, especially with Jackie being there with the president. And it was a very unusual moment and also a very nerve-wracking moment for Marilyn. And I have a lot that's come in around this, but I kind of want to give the setup first so I can let Marilyn bring her thoughts in on this. When Peter Lawford went to introduce Marilyn that night to sing for the president, he said, "Mr. President, the late Marilyn Monroe." The late Marilyn Monroe. And this is significant because 6 months later, on August 5th, see what date was it? 1962. She was 36 years old. Was when she was found dead. So this was very foreboding for him to say this. Very foreboding. And I'm getting right now, it's just like, it was no accident. It was no accident. And I'll elaborate on that. But he introduces her this way, "Mr. President, the late Marilyn Monroe." And there's this brief moment. There's this brief moment where their eyes connect. You see this moment where their eyes connect. And you can tell that she's not feeling it. And that look that is exchanged between them, it says so much. It speaks volumes. And her whole demeanor after that, you could see the nervousness and her discomfort in that moment. And it's because she recognized at that moment that they were making an example of her, that she was being put in the position of being the butt of their jokes, that it was sort of like, woman, know your place. And she actually felt very humiliated by the experience. It was not something that felt respectful to her, especially considering how deep of a love she had for John. She had a very deep connection with John, and John actually confided in her a lot of deep, heavy, intense stuff. And we'll be diving into that in the next video I do. I'm not going to dive into that on tonight's episode. I just want to give you a little background. But she felt very humiliated and very outed and very much thrown under the bus in that moment. And it was a very significant, pivotal turning point. Very significant, pivotal turning point. 6 months later, of course, Marilyn was found dead on August 5th, 1962. There is a lot of discrepancy, a lot of inconsistencies, a lot of incongruencies around that. We are going to go really deep down a rabbit hole with that. That's what I'm going to dive into with tarot with all of you. I really wanted to spend tonight just helping you just feel out the moments leading up to her death and what transpired prior to that, because it's significant. It's significant. Um, Prior to her death, at this time, Marilyn was in the process of separating from her second husband. Oh, no, not her second husband. I'm sorry. Joe DiMaggio was her second husband. Her third husband, Arthur Miller. Arthur Miller was playwright. He was very controversial. He was an open communist. He had very radical views for that time, and his work was highly political. Okay, so he was already somebody that had a lot of attention on him. Marilyn married him, and he was, it's speculated, some of those people that are very close to her have speculated that he was like a father figure to her. But Marilyn has brought through that what she really admired so much about him was that he wasn't as impressed with her surface appearance, that he was one of the first men to come into her life that was actually interested in her intellect and recognized that she had intellect, and she was able to connect with him on a deeper level because she actually really enjoyed reading. She was an avid reader. She was always interested in learning new things, and she was very much focused on growth, and she had a lot of different creative pursuits as well. She also really enjoyed doing watercolor. She had this whole other dimension of herself that people didn't see because they just would look at her and automatically assume that she was like the dumb blonde, the ditzy blonde. And it's sort of like one of these cases where this projection got transposed on her, and the image became so fixated that that's how people related to her. And yet she was actually highly intelligent, very creative, and was a bit of a rebel. She marched to the beat of her own drummer, and she didn't prescribe to the standard way of seeing things. She was very open-minded. She was open-minded when it came to spiritual exploration. She was open-minded in relation to her political views. And she was also very, very hungry for more knowledge. Like she wanted to grow. She wanted to know more. And so they had a very different kind of connection than what she was used to having. And he had actually, um, written a role for her in the Misfits, And she had been actively working on this film leading up to her death. And The Misfits was an interesting movie because it was one of the times when her acting really, really got to shine. Her acting really came forward, and you could see her growth as an actress. And she was able to just take it to a level, on the screen that was so raw and so real and so vulnerable. And it was truly, her best acting of her career. And yet at the same time, she was really struggling at that time. She was using a lot of barbiturates. She was constantly holding up production. At one point, there was talk about shutting the whole production down, but in particular when she had to go into the hospital because she just had gone too far down the rabbit hole. But Clark Gable refused. He said he would pull out if they tried to replace her. So, Clark Gable, also another man that she viewed as somewhat of a father figure. She was always looking for that father in her men, She was always looking for that one who could hold it down, that man that would just love her unconditionally, that would accept her as she was, that would give her that feeling of safety, of being supported, not being alone in the world. She always longed to connect with that soulmate, that one person that she could just settle down with and have a family. She wanted to be a mother. That was one of her big dreams, was to have children. And she had always said that for every child that she had, she would like to adopt one as well. And she just had this really giving, gentle heart. And She loved the idea of being, a housewife. She did. And at the same time, there was this contradiction, because she also loved the glitz, and she loved the glamour. She loved the spotlight and being in this creative field. But it was complicated, right? It was so complicated. And there was the whole dirtiness of the business that is Hollywood and what that put her through, and the way she was treated by the men, the way that she was passed around, the way that she was disrespected. And at that time, you have to imagine, she was deeply in love with John, and John just kind of like pawns her off to his brother. And I mean, this is all, it's pretty much confirmed that, they had involvement, and you'll still hear denials, but you know, everybody knows what the real deal is with that. So, she dealt with a lot of this, with men treating her like she was an object. And at the same time, she recognized the role that she had played in that. She recognized that she allowed herself to be presented as an object, and that she promoted that because it was like a means to an end. Like, she was smart enough to own her actions, and she also was not full of herself. She was not egocentric in any way. She knew she wasn't perfect. She knew she wasn't perfect, but she also knew that though she was a sinner, she was still a good person too. So, she was really able to hold that balance. But she'd been through a lot, and she'd had a really traumatic life, and she had a tumultuous history in love and her marriages, and she struggled with a lot of things. And she learned to cope. She learned to cope with substances, as a lot of people do in that industry. And she was really starting to unravel, especially because she was in the process of splitting up with Arthur. So it was a really intense time for her. And fortunately, she had people that stuck by her side during that time. She was able to finish filming that movie, The Misfits. Um, but it's very interesting because a lot of people have talked about it being a cursed film, because after The Misfits, everybody passed away, within a very brief amount of time. You know, Marilyn died. Clark Gable died of a sudden heart attack. And, it was just sort of like a very similar, almost like a similar story to like Poltergeist, how people talk about Poltergeist being kind of a cursed movie set. Ted's agreeing with that. It's the same thing, with the Misfits. It has this sort of history to it, Um, but it was very interesting the way it all led up. There was like this progression, this moment of her singing for the president, and how she felt being put in that position. She felt really disrespected, she felt really disrespected. And unfortunately, because she felt disrespected, and because she was abroad, and because she wasn't a weak woman. Like, she was very highly independent, and she also was self-protective, and she wasn't going to take any BS from anybody. She was known to be a handful. She was known to be a handful. Um, but unfortunately, with the people that she was hanging out with the crowd that she was running with, you know, running with mobsters, and running with people in politics, and the president and the DA, you know, um, it was an issue, because she did start threatening to go public with certain things. She didn't want to be bossed around. She didn't want to be controlled. She didn't want handlers, and she didn't like being disrespected. She didn't like being disrespected at all. And this is all what led up to the night of her passing. The night of her passing. There was so much volatility surrounding her at that time, and in a large way, she'd kind of checked out. She checked out. She started using a lot of barbiturates, you know, just to numb it out, just to numb it out. She was having a hard time showing up for things. She was starting to have some trouble on set, but she wasn't like down for the count though either. She had new deals coming forward even as she was struggling on these sets. She still had offers coming in. Like, in no way was her career going anywhere. Yeah, she was having a hard time with everything that she was dealing with, but those really close to her have made it very clear that though she was depressed, she was not in any way down for the count or wanting to commit suicide, which is what was kind of put forward on the death certificate and the evaluation from the coroner. It said probable suicide. Probable. Probable. All right. When you get to the coroner and they are doing an autopsy and they are doing an investigation, there is no probable. To put probable on a certificate of death, statement from the coroner, is unheard of. It is absolutely unheard of. And there are so many loopholes. There are so many loopholes. There are so many pieces missing. Even Noguchi, the coroner who wanted to investigate further into Marilyn's death, but data was destroyed. What they needed, the specimens that they had, the things that they were going to study more to determine, if there was foul play involved in Marilyn's death, was destroyed because it was a national security matter. And this stuff is out there. It's out there. You can find it. You can read about it. You can see it. It's all available. It's all available for viewing, but not everybody has really delved in deeply to all that. But you'll hear people say she committed suicide. I mean, that was sort of the official release. That later got changed, and we'll get into that. We'll get into that in the next episode. But the reality is nothing on the crime scene. Nothing on the crime scene. And yes, I'm calling it a crime scene, and I'm being told to call it a crime scene. Nothing on the crime scene alluded to suicide. First of all, if Marilyn had overdosed on barbiturates, as they had claimed, she would have vomited. And there was no vomit. There was no vomit. There also was no trace of those drugs within her system anywhere at all. The bottles of her medication had the caps on. If somebody was going to commit suicide, they're not going to worry about putting the caps back on their pills. You know what I'm saying? They're just not. The way her body was found looked very staged. Okay, so there's like all these pieces that just don't add up. They don't add up. And when she was found dead, the immediate red flag was thrown up regarding, the Kennedy connection immediately. But, Bobby had an alibi. He said he was at a ranch. That time, a ranch up in Northern California in the San Francisco Bay Area. But that's not true. That's not true. And that was proven not true. And there's witnesses. There are, in fact, 18 different witnesses who spotted Bobby in LA at that time. And one of them was an officer. And we'll dive into all of that. Because I really want to bring that into the second episode here. But I want to just finish off this episode because I'm feeling like Marilyn feels like that's enough for tonight. Okay. She just wants you to get the general picture, but I'm going to go ahead and we're going to pull one of her quotes here for you to sit and marinate with, What message do you want to bring forward through your own words? I love this because it's her own words, you know, it's not coming from me, it's coming from her mouth to your ears through me, through me. I want to see what she wants to pass on to all of you with what we've brought in so far. Only parts of us will ever touch only parts of others. That's pretty deep. Only parts of us will ever touch only parts of others. That says so much. That statement says so much. You see what I mean? She was very, very deep. Very, very deep. And she's also really bringing through that there's so much of her that you don't know. And there's so much of her that she wishes that people could have seen, that they could have experienced, that she could have brought forward. She wishes that she could have had more time to really show who she is through her talents, that she could really let people see her depth and her range and so much more of herself. She feels like you got just the tiniest taste of who she is, just scratching the surface. And more than anything, she really wanted to be able to connect with people on a deep level. She always wanted that feeling of being totally embraced. But she just said, now, like, how can somebody embrace you completely when they only know you based on an image they were sold? There's just such a beautiful heart in her that really valued love above all things, love and connection, love and connection. And so she's really excited about this, about moving into this series. And we are going to just ride this energy out. I'm just going to ride it out until everything that she wants expressed has come through. This was just the first initial drop in, and I will be back tomorrow with another session. And we're just going to unravel this story of her life, her death, and what she wants to leave behind as her legacy, and what is that side of her that she wishes you could have experienced, that she wishes you could have connected with, that she wishes you could have seen. She's excited, actually, to have the opportunity to show it to you now. And this feels like a good place to leave off. Stay tuned for episode 2.